One of the things that most grieves me when people say it is I'm not creative. It drives me nuts because everybody is creative. Everyone creates. And it's not just people who get to draw and paint that are creative. Creative is literally, anything that whether it's a memo or a letter or a spreadsheet, whatever it is, you're creating and you're a creator doing your little creator thing and, modeling the creator that created us.
Have you ever thought to yourself, I'm just not creative? I know I have. I mean, you should see my art when I try to sit down with my kids and draw. But the truth is, in the opening pages of Genesis, Scripture reveals that we are all creators, made in the image of the first and best Creator. And our guest today helps us see that truth in a powerful way. My name is Paul Brandis, campus pastor at the Shawnee campus.
And I'm Bill Gorman, campus pastor at our Brookside campus. And our guest today, David Greusel, is the founder and principal of Convergence Design. He's been an architect for over 40 years and has worked on small projects all the way down to a grease factory, we learned, right, all the way up to Major League Baseball stadiums, designing PNC Park in Pittsburgh and Minute Maid Park in Houston. He brings a wealth of knowledge not only about architecture, but about how God has designed each and every one of us to be a creator in his world.
That's exactly right, Bill. And so today's episode is not just for architects. We can't wait for you to dive in and hear more, no matter what you get to do for your vocation. Let's join right now.
Well, David, it's so good to have you with us on the theFormed.life podcast. You've been such a pillar at Christ community and part of this church family for such a long time. It's a joy to have you with us for this conversation.
Did you use the term pillar on purpose?
I thought how can you resist that, right? One of the pillars of the church.
Happy to be.
And you've helped design some of the pillars in our church building.
Some of the literal pillars.
Yes. Along the way. Well, you have had a long career in architecture and design and that kind of thing. I wonder, David, talk to us a little bit about, was there a light bulb moment when you realized that sort of your work and training, passion around architecture could not just be a career, but also a place of spiritual formation and contribution in God's kingdom?
Yeah, I became a Christian in college and had a really hard time for many years, trying to synthesize, what Christianity meant vis-a-vis what it meant to be an architect, because there just wasn't, at that time, there just wasn't a whole lot of overlap between those two realms, unless you were a church architect, but that was kind of a very special category, right? Sure. Which I was not. But I remember very distinctly, and I probably wouldn't have described it this way at the time, but I remember very distinctly the first day that I sat down at a drawing board in an architect's office for paid work. And, this was after 5 years of school. So I'd had 5 years of architecture school. And I sat down and I was getting literally $5 an hour to be an architect, so-called. And I was drawing insignificant details on an insignificant project in Wichita, Kansas. And I just had this overwhelming sense of this is it. This is what I was made to do. And the thing so funny about that is I wasn't designing a cool stadium or something. I was designing a grease factory.
Literally?
And I wasn't actually designing it. I was just adding some details to the drawing so they could build it because there wasn't much of a design. It was just a box. But it was just this powerful sense of this is what I was made to do. And the funny thing about it is that was 46 years ago. And 46 years later, I still have that same feeling that this is what I was made to do every time I sit down at a drawing table.
Do you still have any of those drawings from that first building?
No, I don't have any drawings of the grease factory, but there is still in Wichita, Kansas, a fire stair on the back of an apartment building that I designed myself.
Wow.
That I'm amazed is still standing 46 years later. So the guys who welded the steel together must have done a really good job.
That's great.
Oh my goodness.
So you have that sense. You're sitting at the drafting table, or now the AutoCAD or whatever you're designing in. But
Well, I still draw with a pen.
do you really? Okay.
Yeah, so we use computers a lot in our work, but I still draw by hand a lot.
I
I
love
love
that.
that. Well, so when you're putting pen to paper, how do you think about not just what about the spiritual formation aspect of that? Like, I'm just curious as you've thought about this. Not Christ community, we talk a lot about our work is part of God's kingdom work that He's doing in the world, but it's also a place that forms us
Mhm.
in those spaces. And so, yeah, I'm just even curious as you've over those 46 years, like how have you found yourself formed as a person, as a whole person, but spiritual formation in those spaces?
Well, architecture is described as a discipline, like a lot of things are described as disciplines. And I think, one of the things I picked up from Christ Community years ago was the idea of spiritual disciplines. And I think there's a lot of overlap in those realms in the sense of, certainly spiritual disciplines like prayer and fasting and study, service are things that form you spiritually. But I think architecturally, the disciplines that form an architect, whether they are study or just listening to clients,
Mm.
or in the case of architecture, what you often have is iteration where you do something and then you say, no, that's terrible, throw it away and do it again and throw it away and do it again and throw it away. That iterative process is very much part of the discipline of architecture. And I think that forms architects in the same way that prayer and fasting forms Christians. If that makes sense.
Absolutely. Well, I can imagine there being too, like when you think about the fruit of the spirit, and opportunities to practice patience or self-control. I mean, just as you're doing this work, as you in this kind of disciplines of like, if you think of virtues of fortitude, and those kinds of things, as you're going back for the next iteration and the next iteration, that forms you into a certain kind of person.
Very much so. And, architecture, like any career, has its frustrations and its frustrating moments and its frustrating qualities. And those things form you as well. It's sort of, that friction that sands you down. And, I know that in some cases, uh, sands people down to a nub where they just can't do it anymore and they have to go do something else. But in my case, I have found that friction to be helpful and beneficial. And I've now been doing this for a long time. So I guess I'm maybe I've gotten smooth. I don't know. But
Yeah.
yes, I think, every work has its frustrations. And I think the frustrations of architecture are, they can be all kinds of things, annoying clients, annoying colleagues, uh, you know, contractors that don't build it the way you designed it, building officials that want you to do things that you wouldn't otherwise do. There's any number of frustrations in the profession, but I think those things do shape you, and hopefully they shape you for the better.
Yeah. Yes.
Well, I love to introduce a phrase. Theologians and biblical scholars, and certainly us here at Christ Community, we talk a lot about the cultural mandate that we find in the early chapters of Genesis. So specifically, Genesis 1:28, and then repeated in the second chapter of Genesis, verse 15, where it's kind of, I mean, a quick way to think about the cultural mandate would be God's job description to humanity, and some of the key words, the call to subdue the earth, to work and keep the garden. Would love to hear your reflections on that, our sort of highest level job description, this invitation to join with God in collaborating to make something even more of His good world. I'd love to hear you, David, reflect on that within your vocation, occupation as an architect. You're quite literally shaping the world. And how do you see the act of designing the built environment as a direct fulfillment of the original commission that we get in Genesis?
Yeah.
So I got an insight from a conference I went to once where Mako Fujimura was a speaker, the painter, and he talked about the gold that is in the hills that's talked about in the book of Genesis.
Yeah.
And so just some interesting thoughts about that. One is that the gold was hidden in the hills, and you had to go and find it first of all. So it was a matter of discovering what was there. But then obviously, gold and every other metal is not just that you find it, but what you make of it. And his whole point was that the creation mandate wasn't just, standing in the garden and looking around at the pretty trees.
That's right.
But it was actually digging into the hills and finding the minerals that were there and then making stuff out of those minerals. And that, to me, is like the most basic description of what architecture and design is. I mean, I'm frankly not the guy that digs the minerals out of the hills, but I am the guy that says, what if we made it like this? Or, what if we made it like that? And I'm so thankful that the whole construction industry exists that can take those minerals and transform them into beams and girders and glass and, all those wonderful things that we use. But at the end of the day, it's that idea of taking the earth and the gifts that have been hidden in it, like the gold in the hills, and fabricating something out of them that becomes the environment that we live in. And, that to me is like that's got to be the most direct and obvious application of the creation mandate there is, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I love that.
Maybe number 2 right after farmer.
Right. Yeah. That's right. That's right. Yeah. Which is part of why we invited you to be on this episode. Exactly.
Yeah, such a picture of that. And we were talking a little bit just about this idea too, that, the built environment, this is before we started the episode, is this whole, it's not just buildings, right? It's all that goes into
it's everything.
Right. And I think sometimes there's this view of the garden too. It's like, it's this idyllic kind of natural space where we don't need any shelters or roads or whatever. But as we think about what does it mean to expand the garden and the ultimate destination that this project is going to be a city, we see in Revelation.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That's an insight that I gained from reading a book by Eric Jacobson called Sidewalks in the Kingdom. And this was an insight that just hit me like a 2x4, was that the destination of Christianity is not the Garden of Eden.
Yeah.
It's a city.
Yes.
And, it's obvious when you read the Bible, but it's not obvious because there's so many Christians that think we're headed back to the garden.
Yeah,
That's right.
And we're not. We're headed to a great heavenly city. And the city has all kinds of implications in it, the primary one of which is something built by human hands.
Yes.
And maybe this particular city, maybe this New Jerusalem we're talking about is fabricated by God, but nevertheless,
Yeah.
it's fabricated by somebody. It's not just a natural environment that happened.
Right.
And so I think there are trees in it, so it's beautiful. It can be garden-like, but it's not a garden, it's a city.
That's right. Yeah, garden-like. That's good language. But it is. It's like in John Dyer, who we hosted for an event on kind of technology and artificial intelligence. He has a book on technology called From the Garden to the City, and others have made that same point. And it's fascinating to read scripture with this lens, and even to sit with someone in your profession, because pretty quickly we get to God giving some design documents and asking people to fabricate them. And I know that's been an important part of your story. I was just reading, as we go through kind of reading the Bible in a year, I was in Exodus reading the second half of the book. Sometimes we trail off. maybe not you, David, because there's these really detailed design elements about the tabernacle. And so I don't know if I could just have you riff on that a little bit, or talk about the moment where that was kind of, because I know I've heard you talk before about that as an aha moment with Bezalel and Oholiab. Thank you. Yeah,
Don't get me started on Bezalel and all.
Well, I'd love to. No, I would love to. I really would. I'd really love to, because it is part of that. One of the phrases that comes to mind with the cultural mandate is almost like, we say this, like when you're in a brainstorming session, you want to yes and that good idea. It was like God said to us, here's my good creation, go ahead and yes and it.
Yeah.
And one of the ways we yes anded it under his direction was the tabernacle to be a suitable dwelling for his presence. So I'd love to get you started on those guys and just hear your reflection on them and what they mean to you.
Yeah, so God's giving Moses the instructions on how to build the tabernacle, and he says, look, I have chosen Bezalel and Oholiab, and he gives their tribe and everything, and filled them with the Spirit of God, which, by the way, is the first time that's ever mentioned in Scripture, for designing artistic work in bronze and metal and fabric and wood. And he names all these materials, and he doesn't say, and now I'm going to tell Bezalel and Oholiab exactly what to do. He says, I've gifted these guys, so use them to do their thing and, design and build this wonderful tabernacle that I have for you to do.
Do you know what else I noticed this time reading through is he also talks about them. There's a leadership component. He talks about them as being gifted to be able to teach others to do the same. And that was really fresh for me as I read through this time more recently. It just stood out to me. I don't know if you've had that experience having served in the industry for so long of having an architect under your wing or when you've had more of a leadership role. But I just read that recently again, and that part of it struck me as afresh as well. That's part of it for those guys as well, is to lead others in that same way, in that same good glorifying work.
Yeah, well, at Christ Community, we're big on the apprenticeship model.
Yes, exactly.
And interestingly, so is the architectural profession, where everybody has to serve. It goes by various names. Internship is one, but there are others that you have to have a period of like 3 years after you get your diploma before you can sit for the licensing exam, where you just have to work with an architect and be under that person's guidance. And that's really an important part of how, in fact, I always say that's how I passed the exam on my first try. It was not so much because of my education, which was fine, but because of the apprenticeship that I did for 3 years working in this little architect's office in Wichita, where everybody was in the same room and yelling across the room. And that's how you learn about architecture, is from architects, yelling at each other during the day. Not from some professor, giving you a lecture about, whether Gothic is better than classical.
Yeah. Wow, that's fascinating. Well, that's good.
Well, and thinking about, so you were in your career, you worked for firms, and then eventually you started your own firm, and you've built a lot of different kinds of things. We now know a grease factory you got to be a part of in Wichita, and designed some staircases for apartment buildings. Yeah, a lot of what you've built are large gathering spaces. I know you've got to build a couple of ballparks, design Major League Baseball parks, which is just incredible. I'm a big baseball fan. Paul, you like baseball too. So I mean, just the thought,
and they're just beautiful. Yeah, I mean, they're just some of the best in the.
I mean, I think some of them have won awards, right? I mean, I don't.
Yeah. PNC Park gets recognized fairly regularly as one of the best ballparks,
which is just so cool that you've gotten to do that. And I mean, that's a place when we think about that. I mean, just how many. Probably at this point, hundreds of thousands of people have sat in those stands.
Oh, millions.
By this point. Which is just wild to think that something you got to design is a place where people go for whatever, how many 162 games, half of them are there. So there's a lot of games every year, a lot of time spent there. And I knew there's this idea of social architecture, this idea that we design spaces, how we design a space dictates how people interact in those spaces. And so whether we're talking PNC Park, big baseball stadium, or, we're sitting in an office building, how can a space like that facilitate the love of neighbor and designing at a human scale and thinking about, how does that biblical love of neighbor come into your thought as you build a space where millions of people spend time?
Well, let me tell you a couple of stories about PNC Park in particular, because I think they will help to answer this question. One is that because of the fact that it's right next to a river, the main concourse level of PNC Park is actually 22 feet above the sidewalk. So everybody who goes into that stadium has to go up 22 feet on an escalator or a ramp to get to the main concourse. Well, the entire lower level at street level is private space, which is where all the clubhouses and the batting cages and the training rooms are for the team. So one of the things I was faced with as a designer was, how do you make that first level of PNC Park friendly to the street while preserving the privacy of everything that goes on behind it? And the answer was actually found in Pittsburgh, because Pittsburgh is famous for its glass block. which is this masonry product that's glass, but it's also either opaque or translucent or frosted, so you can't see through it. So we used a lot of glass block on the ground floor to both animate the street level of the building and preserve the privacy of the players and the coaches and the managers and folks that are behind that wall. So that was kind of one way that we did that. The other thing is just my very favorite story about PNC Park is I was at a conference there one time in Pittsburgh, and this pastor comes up to me and he says, "I love PNC Park, and I got to tell you, I have season tickets, and we sit on the third base side, and I love to just sit there and watch the sunset on the skyline, behind the ballpark, which is, that's the main feature of the ballpark is the skyline that you see when you're sitting there." And he says, "When I'm sitting there, this place helps me to love my city better." I was like, that is so cool.
Wow.
It's like, how do you beat that?
Yeah.
So if you design a space the right way, you actually help people to love their city better.
Yeah. I love that. It's like putting like a frame around a picture. I mean, it's like that stadium becomes this like frame around the picture
Right.
because and highlights its beauty because every city has its ugliness, its brokenness, and people need to be reminded, and they get to do that when they go to the ballpark of like, oh, the traffic was bad when I came in, and I saw homelessness over here and whatever, but like, wow, this is an incredible place to live.
Yeah, well, it's like people who design vacation homes, they're always framing up a beautiful view, right?
Yeah.
You buy your little piece of the mountainside, and then you frame up a beautiful view of the mountains with the big picture window. And that's essentially what we've done with the ballpark is we have framed up a view of Pittsburgh for the citizens of Pittsburgh that they see when they sit in the ballpark. That's, it's sort of like a vacation home in that regard. They sit back and go, "Wow, this is really a cool city. I like living in this city." And the ballpark helps facilitate that.
Which, as Christians, we also have this deep, kind of theme throughout. We've been talking about Garden to City, but you've seen this call in Jeremiah to love the city where God has placed us. And so whether they're aware of it or not, maybe they don't even share any kind of Christian faith at all, but when someone from Pittsburgh sits in that ballpark, you're helping them to love the city where God has placed them.
That's the idea.
Yeah, so good.
I'm so glad he came up to you and said that and told you that story.
Yeah.
And that's so powerful.
And so glass block is that's what manufactured in Pittsburgh.
It's a Pittsburgh thing.
I did not know
The
that.
buildings all over Pittsburgh have glass block because the company that made it is a Pittsburgh company.
That's wild. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I just love even that's part of
Like
it's
local
such a
infusion.
yes.
Yeah, well, that's one of my things as an architect. Because I work all over the country, I have this very deep sense of I've got to make this building particular to a place. And
That's powerful.
not just come in with the, generic David Greusel style, whatever that is, but rather just I spend a lot of time seriously studying the architecture, culture, history, ethnography of a city just to figure out what's the city about, what are its architectural traditions, what is it like, what is it not like, and then try to reflect that in the buildings that I design because I know that I'm a visitor and in some sense a carpetbagger, and I want the people who see this building to go, "Now that's a Pittsburgh building."
Wow.
Or in Houston, "Now that's a Houston building." And if I did it right, that's what they say. Rather than, "Oh, that's a David Greusel building," because, I'm just a visitor. But I want the buildings to really reflect the place that they are, which is why in Pittsburgh we have glass block, we have stone masonry, which is actually a big thing in Pittsburgh. We have steel, which is obviously a very big thing in
That's
Pittsburgh.
the football team's name.
But also galvanized aluminum panels, which not many people realize that the Galvalume company was also a Pittsburgh company. So we did all that stuff very intentionally.
Well, and that theme of place is also so important in the biblical narrative from these land promises, just that place matters, and particular places and particular people and the stories of those places. So yeah, so good.
Do you have any other examples? I'm putting you on the spot with this of projects where you kind of did that research and the end result was one where you went, I think I think God led me to kind of like really hit the sweet spot of matching this particular building to this particular place. You've given the PNC Park one, but any others that you've gotten to do. I know you haven't just exclusively done sports stadiums, so any others that stand out over the years?
Yeah, so we did, well, yeah, one in particular that comes to mind is a little convention center we did in Dubuque, Iowa. It's called the Grand River Center. It's not a great big convention center, but it sits right on the Mississippi River. And I remember we did a design charrette, which is an intense design workshop with people who were, with the city and involved in the project. And I did this really quick sketch of a building that had like stone on it, and it had these sloping roof shapes and a glass room that kind of projected out over the river, which was kind of a crazy idea because it really had no function. And and the people, it was so funny. The people with the city just looked at that picture and they went, "That's it. That's what we want. We want that." And we ended up building that very much like that. And the river room, which is this glass room that sticks out over the river wall and literally hangs out over the Mississippi River, is incredibly hard to light. Its acoustics are terrible because it's all glass.
Is it kind of like a glass floor? Are you looking down?
No,
Okay.
it doesn't have a glass floor. It has a floor, but and you can't do PowerPoint in there because you can't darken it because it's all glass, and it's the most popular room in the building because it has this incredible panoramic view of the Mississippi River. And it's like, this is the room that Dubuque needed, even though the program for the convention center didn't have it in it.
Yeah.
But it's the most popular room in the city because it's got this, it's like, it's all about the river.
Yes.
And it works so well.
And even going back to our conversation about Bezalel and Oholiab earlier, it's like in that moment, it's like God has gifted you with those skills for you just to, I wonder if I'll just put this on the sketch.
Yeah.
Like let's just see what happens there. And that sometimes we think about, God's spirit being at work and it's like, oh, someone's giving a sermon or they're speaking in tongues or they're healing someone or whatever. But it's like, no, like that is the spirit of God.
No, that's my thing. That's what I do. And when it works well, it's really neat to see it happen.
Oh, I love that. Thank you on the spot. If you're ever in Dubuque, Iowa,
that's right.
Swing by. I'm going to swing by, poke into the room.
I love going to visit.
Send David a picture. That's awesome. Well, not everyone listening is an architect. We have professions, occupations, vocations of all various sorts that listen to the podcast, and accountants, stay-at-home parents, sales professionals, small business owners, on and on and on, all kinds of work represented. But I wonder, the question I have for them, David, is if they look at their work through the lens of a designer of their own environment. So whether that's a spreadsheet, a home atmosphere, a client relationship, how can that help them reimagine what might be, I'm even now reflecting back on you designing the insignificant parts of the grease factory.
Yeah.
So it's like boring tasks, right? But work as worship, that even those tasks can be sacred work. How does the idea of them as a designer, even though they're not an architect, they serve in their own work and field, how can that help them?
One of the things that most grieves me when people say it is, I'm not creative. It drives me nuts because everybody is creative. Everyone creates. And I wrote an essay once called The Art of the Spreadsheet, the whole point of which is that, as an architect, I have a great job that's easy to talk about and everybody can like, oh, cool, you get to design buildings. But what if my job is, adding up rows of boxes of numbers in a spreadsheet? How is that creative? And the point of the essay was that a person who really masters the art of the spreadsheet, not just putting numbers in boxes, but figuring out how to use those boxes to use formulas to manipulate and, study and turn the data over literally, flipping tables around and stuff like that. The people that master that art are creating their own beauty, right?
Yeah.
It's just a different kind of beauty. So it's a beautiful spreadsheet. And, I remember one time hearing a physician talk about a beautiful bill, which, that sort of makes you go clang. But a beautiful bill. But what he meant was that all the charges were properly aligned with the services that were provided
Oh,
and accurately reflected what was done for the patient.
come on.
And,
Yeah.
it's like a beautiful bill. I get it,
Yeah.
So it's not just people who get to draw and paint that are creative. Creative is literally, anything that whether it's a memo or a letter or a spreadsheet or whatever, or dinner, whatever it is, you're creating, and you're a creator doing your little creator thing and, modeling the creator that created us.
That's amazing. I love that. Thank you for that insight.
Yeah, that's so good. And I mean, as someone who's not good at spreadsheets, when I have someone who really is really good,
No, it's
who-
you.
well, yeah, and it is so helpful, and there really is a beauty to it.
There is,
and especially, I mean, you can look at a spreadsheet that's poorly designed versus one that's
yeah.
designed and gives you the information, the formatting, the ability to quickly change a variable and see how that parses through the whole thing. I love that example.
Yeah, no, a beautiful spreadsheet is one where you have one little box that you change a percent, from 7.5% to 8%, and all the other numbers in the spreadsheet magically change. It's like, that's really cool.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's so good. Well, David, this has been so good. And as we wrap up at this time, we always like to ask our guests one final question, just kind of to get to know you. And we've got to know you a little bit through telling your story and that kind of thing. But you spent these 46 years as an architect.
I have.
If there's a parallel universe somewhere where David Greusel just gets to do something like completely different than be an architect, what does that David Greusel do? Like what?
Well, there's always stand-up, right?
We were talking about that before we started
I
recording.
asked Teresa before we got engaged what she thought about being married to a stand-up comedian, and she was like, I don't think so. But apart from stand-up, I think my career alternatives are probably sort of architecture adjacent.
Okay. Yeah.
One is I really like structural engineering, and I could imagine myself as a structural engineer, which is, a whole lot more math than what I do as an architect, but it's something I really just sort of intuitively relate to. What makes buildings stand up, or bridges, or, pretty much anything. The other is also kind of architecture adjacent, is I really love maps, and I could imagine myself as a cartographer.
Oh, that's
Except the maps that I work on, of course, I'm sure map making is all computerized now, but I'd be the one doing the hand-drawn map, with the ink pens.
I love
That's
maps. I just love maps. Maybe it's from my Boy Scout history and
I'm
certainly
a total map freak, and if I couldn't be an architect, I would very much love to be a cartographer.
I love that, David.
really old answer.
Well, thank you so much for being with us, and we'll put all the things that we've mentioned, show notes. We'd love to actually put some links to some of the buildings you've designed so we can go take a look at
think we
that.
definitely should.
Find that convention center and
You could even put a link to the article on your Art of the Spreadsheet.
Yeah, can we?
Absolutely.
I was gonna say it. I didn't want to promise it if we couldn't get it, but I would love to.
You could totally do that.
Okay, we will find it and we will link to it in the show notes. I know I'm gonna read it.
Yeah,
So,
can't wait. All right, well, thank you so much for joining us on this episode of the Formed.life podcast. We'll look forward to seeing you on the next one.